Okay. I promise to be short to be short today. I gotta get these. I get yammering. I know it's a problem. Okay, today I'm wearing a black. I'm wearing a shirt that has black sad on it. I'm not sure if you can see him. He's a bande dessinée character, and if you don't know him, he's famous character in France and Belgium and on the continent in Spain and so on. This is the character. This is the book. There are three books. The way that bande dessinée works is that the French don't have the flimsy sort of monthly comic book that we have. It's not clear we're going to have a monthly comic book either if the stores don't survive this crap. But anyway, the French instead publish a volume that looks like if you have had an Asterix or a Tintin volume, it looks like that. Usually it's hardcover. It's say 40 pages, and that's it. And that's a year's. Anyway, so this is the art in this thing is so gorgeous. It's a it's an imagining. You can see it here. Yeah, it's an imagining of a hard-boiled detective story set in the sort of 40s, and the characters are all animals. So Black Sad is a private eye detective. So here he is at a murder scene, and the drawings are just gorgeous, and the painting is beautiful. This is a lovely little scene here where he's asking questions of the little house mouse who is, of course, has witnessed part of the murder. And this is just a gorgeous panel. The perspective, rendering a stairway is so complex, and the perspective is so complex. And this is just such a natural. It's such a naturally filmic shot. It's just very filmic. The whole page is just beautifully done. So I haven't shown you bande dessinée in general. This is in English, so you don't. If you can get this volume and the next volume as well. This is 3 books essentially in one. And what did I pay for it? It's $30 US, so something like $40. I cannot recommend it highly enough. It's just and it's in love with the hard-boiled detective. But my goodness, the art is amazing. Like here's the back panel. Here he is. Oh wow! Just look at how three-dimensional and luminous that is. So Black Sad. So very popular. And while I'm talking about if you do read French, Michelangelo Prado is Spanish, I'm pretty sure, artist, and he this is very European. I mean, it's slow, and it's quite moody. Yeah, so this may not be the most wonderful time. This is a particular book is gorgeous though. It's about a guy's memory of his love affair and what happened, and a sort of youngish woman, young middle-aged woman comes to this little town in France and to find out what happened to her, or to sort of figure out her father's estate, I think is why she's there. And so there's a lot of, you can see how incredibly, he draws a lot in pastel, and so you can see how it's very, very fine, these drawings are. And so it goes from, like, here's his boyhood. So there he is, sort of looking at this, and then there's these gorgeous landscapes which are divided. So it's beautiful, beautiful stuff. but it's basically the story of this old man who's looking back at his life, and he has, does he have hallucinations, or does he have basically visitations from the sea, sort of our the sea goddess? Is he crazy? Does he have dementia, or is he living in the past? So here he is playing the piano, and as he plays the piano, the goddess of the sea things begin to swim around him, and there's a beautiful panel where he goes out to the meadow, and he sees these whales. It's not really very clear. He sees these whales. Well, floating. That's not really very good. Let me see if I can find something better. But he has these visions, and so it's very much a sort of what happened to him, what transpired in his past, and he needs to sort of come to terms with that, and come to terms with the woman he left behind, or did he leave her behind, or what happened. And so it's quite complex. And the woman who comes to investigate, they become friends, and ultimately, and she's treated badly by the villagers, and she's tough, so she's like, whatever. But the two of them essentially make common cause, and slowly work their way through to sort of a rapprochement with the present. One of his friends has gone down on a ship at sea. Yeah, here's the sort of. This is a little bit clearer, but there are sort of so he has these visions of the ocean. Anyway, this is called Ardalan, and the guy's name is Prado, and he's another famous. Some of his stuff has been translated, not as much as the Guarnido Canales Black Sad. I said I was going to talk about some of the other books. One of them that I want to talk about today is the Sherry Tepper, The Family Tree. And some of you have read The Gate to Women's Country, because I forced you to. And so you might look at Tepper and think, oh no, I don't. But this is such a different book from The Gate to Women's Country. Gate to Women's Country is an angry, upset book, which I think is justifiably angry. And it has this weird, her weird take on homosexuality, which is just, I don't know what that's about. I don't know whether she changed her mind about that. I don't know. But that never reappears again. It's only in that one book. I really don't get it. Anyway, the plot here is that we start off with a character who's a police officer named Dora, and that's an interesting name to have too, because Dora is so important in the Freudian world, because Dora was one of the few women of the 22 or whatever it was cases that Freud built his whole theory on. But Dora starts off with in this very sterile, sort of unpleasant environment, and she slowly moves away from that because she finds a weed growing in her walkway. And as she goes to work, she sees this weed. And she starts to try to get rid of it. She uproots it and moves it, and tries to get rid of it. And the damn thing keeps reappearing. And as the weed reappears and begins to grow, she begins to change. And her attitude towards her life begins to change. She begins to get rid of sort of the sterile, her idea about what a relationship is, and she gets rid of this sort of guy who's he's not particularly a problem, but his mother is a problem. She's very controlling, and so she starts to get rid of that. So there are two stories in the book. One story is Dora in the present, where this weed starts to grow, and it grows, and it starts to take over her house, and it's like, and she's trying to figure out what's going on, and as the weed starts to take over her house, people are like, do you want to cut that back? And she's like, no. For some reason, she decides, no, she's not going to do it. And meanwhile, there's this guy stalking her. And as he basically tries to come at her, the weed begins to protect her. And it brings animals to her, which begin to live in her house and share the house with her. And basically, it's very comfortable. I mean, the house is comfortable, and it's warm, and she begins to really like the fact that there are green things growing everywhere, and it's living. And she begins to basically make an arrangement. Basically, she comes to an accommodation with the weed, and so. And the weed begins to protect her, and it begins to save her from basically what we might call masculine violence. Because Tepper is a feminist. She was a feminist. And so there's a lot that never really stops. The issues of sort of male on female violence never stops being a thing for Tepper, and that's fine. There's no problem there. So the other story is far in the future, and it's about a princess named Opal Ears, and the characters of the princess and her chief lady in waiting, who's this complete character. She's this funny sort of ass-kicking, take no prisoners. I think her name is Blanche or Constance. I can't remember. It's been a while. She's such a character, and so they're in some unexplained other. There's another narrative. So there's Dora's narrative, and then there's the narrative of Opal Ears, and Tepper goes back and alternates between these two narratives. And it's not clear at all how they intersect. They seem to be on different planets or in different worlds. It's not clear at all. And slowly you begin to get the sense that these are connected. These two worlds somehow are connected. And what Dora is doing as she begins to pursue a different kind of justice is having an effect and is related to what is happening with Opal Ears as she begins a quest, basically, in her world. And so Opal Ears gets on the road with her lady in waiting, and the sort of other typical characters go along on a quest. There's always the cranky character, and it's a typical quest sort of story. But it's funny, and it's charming, and it's lighthearted. So the book starts off in quite a sort of like, oh, you think, oh, this is going to be heavy. And it's not. It loosens up, and it becomes it gets sort of funnier and funnier. The stakes are still high. Things are still dangerous. I mean, Dora is in danger, but she keeps being saved, and she saves herself, and nature saves her, basically. And the more she thinks about the vine, the weed, the more she can connect with it, to the point that she can actually begin to communicate with it. And as that happens, Opal Ears' story with her quest becomes more and more, it's like, what's going on? And so she's on a quest to, and this is fairly common for Tepper, she often has quest stories. Singer from the Sea is a quest novel. Sideshow is a quest novel. Plague of Angels is a quest novel. It's a fairly common structure for novels. And another great quest novel, which maybe I'll talk about tomorrow or in a couple of days, which is also very readable and will grab you and grip you, is Dan Simmons' book Hyperion. And if you were to like Hyperion, which is done in one, I mean, it's a complete book in its own. There are 3 more books that are in that environment or in that world, and they're all extremely compelling reads. I mean, they're great. So maybe I'll talk about the Hyperion books. But anyway, the quest novel has a very particular pattern to it. You get on the quest, and you get to know the characters, and they go on their journey. They start to tell their stories. And this is a really old pattern, right? I mean, you may or may not have been exposed at some point to the Canterbury Tales, which is Geoffrey Chaucer's writer of Middle English in Middle England. And the Canterbury Tales are considered to be the first masterpiece, basically, of sort of the early, what is sometimes called the early moderns. And you have to take these terms with a grain of salt or a bag of it. Anyway, Chaucer's Canterbury Tales tells the story of pilgrims who are going on the pilgrimage to Canterbury, and as they go, they decide, or the wife of Bath, who's a feminist, an early feminist, and will brook no nonsense from anybody. She's this great character. Says, well, let's tell stories. Let's tell our stories. And so each one of them tells a story on the way. And some of the stories are hilarious and bawdy, they're funny and crazy. Some of them are sad, and some of them are courtly romances, and some of them are sort of so they're there to entertain. And anyway, the quest narrative in Western literature is a very old and reliable form of narrative, and it has a real because of that form, it has a real sort of reassurance to it. Anyway, so basically Dora is trying to solve a mystery and a murder, and deal with essentially the ex-mother-in-law, because she separates herself from this guy that she was maybe going to sort of settle down into a prison life with. And as she separates herself from that, she begins to deal with the way that we deal with nature here and now. And as I say, it's a very opening. It's opening. It's a good things happen. It's an unfolding of things. And meanwhile, Opal Ears is on her quest. Now, one of the important things about this book is you must not look it up on the frickin' web. Okay, if you decide to read this book, it's funny, it's charming. It's a great narrative. It'll grab you once you got to give Tepper. You always have to give Tepper 80 pages to get going, and then once she gets going, they say about this book. These are big books that unfold you. It's really true. I mean, sometimes I read a Tepper book just because it will completely absorb you, and it's like, oh, you want to read your book? I want to read my book. Get it away. You send people out of the room so you can read your book, and that's what these books are like. And so it's nothing like the grimness of Gate to Women's Country or Grass, which is a very grim book. Very good, but very grim. It moves along, and it's got a good nature to it. But there is a trick to the book, and it's very important not to look up the web, because somebody will put a spoiler on it and spoil the book and give up the trick. Spool the book, as I was going to say. They'll spool the book for you. So that's no fun. And so if you look up a Wikipedia article, or you look this book up, it's going to screw it up. So don't look it up. Of course, as soon as I say don't look it up, people immediately look the damn thing up. I used to use this in my popular culture class. And, I couldn't get people to read the book. Anyway, whatever. Then I used it for the fourth year class for a while. And again, people looked at it and they were like, what? There's 460 pages. Like, you will want it not to finish. You'll be reading it going, oh, I don't want it to finish. There's this wonderful moment at the beginning, because at a certain point you start to think, well, is this magic? And so there's a discussion in the world of Opal Ears, which seems to be a sort of medieval, typical magical environment. The sort of Game of Thrones, where there seems to be magic. They seem to be living in a sort of Bronze Age. They don't have, contemporary technologies and so on. And that's the world of Opal Ears. So there's a prince that Opal Ears is going to meet, and that's at the end of the journey, basically. So you also visit with the prince. Inside the Opal Ears narrative, there's a split narrative. But that doesn't, some people, I'm just thinking of my sister here, who hates books that are like, there are 4 or 5 different narratives running, and they're all braided together. So, chapter 1 is about Joe and his party, and chapter 2 is about Susan and her party, and chapter 3 is about Rebecca, and chapter 4 is about Eden, and chapter 5 is about Nancy, and then you get back to chapter 1. It's chapter 6, and you get back to Joe's story, and you're like, oh, could I just please have a novel about, like, as soon as you get interested in one person's story, they leave you on cliffhangers at the end of chapter 4, and you're like, oh, it's a cliffhanger, great, now I won't know what happens until chapter 12, and you have to jump ahead to chapter. It's just a lot of work, right? So this is not like that. It does alternate between the two different worlds. But so one of the princes says, basically, can anything happen? Or is this a world of miracles? Consider, so one of the sort of advisors says, consider, in the universe of all things that could happen, there are some events still vanishingly small probability of happening, right? So things can happen. Still, occasionally, things do happen that have a very small probability, and these things are called miracles. Some of them are quite nice, like instantaneous cures for incurable diseases, or escapes from certain death. Some are quite nasty, like rains of frogs, right, which is quite biblical, where suddenly there's, frogs are raining. It's not a good thing to have happen. Obviously, since the probabilities are so limited, the supply of natural miracles is always small. So this is an explanation for basically how do these miracles occur? How is it that some people's diseases aren't going to remission and that's it? How does it happen? Well, maybe it's a miracle. Magic is a system for tapping into the miraculous. That is, of changing the probability that so here's the scientific explanation for magic, that you change the probability that certain things will occur, of bending certain natural forces in order to influence probability itself. As time goes on, however, people learn that things they thought were impossible are, in fact, merely improbable, and they learn to make improbable things happen through technology, until time comes when no one believes in magic anymore, because all improbable things are done by machines. Izzy kicked the bench with his heels, sending a small cataract of dust to the floor. How probable is it I'm going to have to solve this great enigma thing? Because there's a problem that they have to resolve. There's a threat to the world. With or without magic. And so the advisor hums for a time. I really couldn't say. It has all the aspects of a standard hero test. Hero tests take the form of labors, or riddles, or quests, and this is probably a quest. So it's great. It's like, I'm telling you right now, the kind of story you're in. This is the kind of... There are many kinds of quests. People go hunting for lost jewels, or books, or heirs to the throne, or swords. He cocked his head. The sword is a very favorite thing to quest for. The very word is ancient. In the very ancient language of Avestan, it was called Svart. Svart is sword. It's phallic, of course, which probably explains why it is so often sought after. I see no reason, says the prince. Well, that my phallus would be either sought after or referred to as a great enigma, said Izzy somewhat stiffly. A small enigma, to be sure, of interest only to myself. Why should we think a sword has anything to do at all with this quest? No reason, says the advisor. I just thought the possibility was interesting. And so they have this discussion about magic. And this is one of these sort of interesting things about fantasy in general, which is that people often who sort of cross, writers, thinkers who straddle the worlds between magic and fantasy, look at magic, fantasy, and science fiction and say, well, maybe magic is technology and by other forms, and maybe severely advanced. This sort of famous, I think Arthur C. Clarke said it first, I can't remember, that any sufficiently advanced form of technology appears to be magic. So, if we went back now, say 300 years, and somebody said, oh, we need to, dig out this pond, and make it into a reservoir. And somebody else said, oh, okay, I'll get my backhoe and just dig it in and then just dig it out. Okay, that's done. That's this morning. And they'd be like, what? What do you mean it took a morning? Like, that's 3 months work with a bunch of guys. They're like, no, it's done. What else do you need done? And people would be like, so I remember when I first started teaching these ideas about technology and the way technology appears to us and so on. I said, there are things like if you go and turn on a car, for some people, that basically, effectively, a car becomes a black box for a lot of us. Because really, how does it work? I mean, I remember being, I think, quite small. Oh, I don't know. Maybe I was maybe in my 10 or something like that when I realized that there was an electrical system in a car. I didn't think there was an electrical system. What? What do you mean there's electrical? I mean, I'd heard about a battery, but so at some point, my father must have opened the hood of the car and said, "Yeah, that's the battery. This is that." But electrical system? What? I didn't understand that there was a motor that started the motor. What? What's that about? What do you mean there's a motor that starts the motor? It's like, yeah, there's a starter motor. I'm like, what? Well, how did that get started? None of this made sense to me. So basically, a car was a black box as far as I was concerned. This is something that you got into, and my parents put a key into it and drove around, and we appeared somewhere else, And over the course of time, I got to learn a bit more. You just began to collect information about cars and so on. And I was like, there are these. Oh, it takes on gasoline, and then it combusts could we even say combust? Expands the gasoline. As a mechanic friend of mine once said, it doesn't explode, Tim. It expands. I'm like, okay, and pushes up the pistons. Blah blah blah. So I remember saying this something about cars and the way the cars worked. And I was talking to a first-year class. This is when I first got to Western. And somebody piped up and said, if my car starts on a winter morning, it is a miracle. I was like, yeah. Right on. True enough. True, Dad. Anyway, so I highly recommend this. And there are very funny there are very funny moments. There are genuinely funny moments. Towards the end of the book, the two stories do come together, and the enigma basically is resolved. So, it's not as though this goes on being frustrated. It's done in one. It's not a series book. It's you can buy this book or get it. You can probably get it for 99 cents plus $6 shipping. Or you can get it on Kindle or whatever. But it is a great book, and I can't. It's just witty, charming, deep down, serious, and inventive. And as I say, my bar for the books I'm recommending over the next few days, because I seem to be doing one a day basically. This brings an end to our session today. As I promised, I keep it short. And the bar that I'm giving for these is that they are captivating rather than funny, and that they will hold your attention. That is, they will keep you interested, compelled, and interested. So, like most things, you have to give them a chance. You're not going to be sucked into a book as quickly as you're going to be sucked into a film, something like that. I'm reminded. I'll leave you with this one, where I was interviewing an author who writes extremely tight minimalist fiction. Now, minimalist fiction they are as the title suggests, minimalist. They are small, compressed narratives. So Hemingway is considered to be a minimalist, even though the late books are like, we did go on there, Ernest. But the early Hemingway books, like To Have and Have Not, or The Sun Also Rises, or Farewell to Arms, are considered to be minimalist fiction. Raymond Carver wrote minimalist fiction. He's probably one of the most famous minimalists. Anyway, so I asked this guy. I said, well, we were talking about reading, and I said, I've been reading blah, blah, blah. I said, you have to give so-and-so 60 pages to get going. He said, I don't. And I said, okay, fair enough. Like, what do you... He said, I wouldn't give somebody more than 4 pages, maybe 10 pages at most. I was like, okay, right. And so this was very important. I mean, this was a very insightful for both, for him as a writer. So I wrote this down, and okay, eventually I wrote about it. And then later on, I thought, I wonder, did he mean he wouldn't give somebody 4 pages to basically, you wouldn't have to keep the audience for 4 pages as a writer or as a reader. And I was like, so if he was writing something, he wouldn't expect his audience to stay with him. If he hadn't got them in the first 4 pages, he wouldn't expect them to stick around. What about if he was a reader? So was he giving me advice? Was he saying this is how it was for him as a reader or for him as a writer? So I kept forgetting to ask him. I see him every now and then. So finally I said to him, hey, you remember we talked about the... He said, well, yeah, okay, yeah, I remember that. And I said, are you talking about, as you as a writer or you as a reader? And he sort of hesitated for a minute. He said, what does it matter? And I was like, yeah, so true. So I'd spent that whole time, trying to puzzling over this enigma. Turned out, no enigma. Same thing. Short is short.